Module 4, we're going to talk about long-term assets, sometimes called other assets. We'll be discussing what are long-term assets, how do we account for the long-term asset acquisition costs, how do you calculate depreciation and amortization, how do you account for the sale or disposal of the asset, and then capitalization policies that the companies may have. Here are some examples of long-term assets: equipment, land, buildings, natural resources such as timber or coal mine or something of that nature, patents and copyrights, and goodwill. All of the other assets are depreciated or amortized with the exception of land. Land is not depreciated. It's considered to hold its cost throughout its useful life. However, such land improvements as paving, curbs, sidewalks, things of that nature are capitalized and depreciated over their useful life. We have three terms we use which are basically interchangeable, but they apply to different asset classifications. For equipment, buildings, and land improvements, we calculate depreciation. For natural resources, we actually calculate depletion. In other words, how are they depleted as they're used up? And for intangibles, such as copyrights, patents, and goodwill, we amortize them over their useful life. But basically, all three terms refer to how we're using the asset up over its useful life. Acquisition cost is more than just the invoice cost that we pay for an item. Remember, all assets are booked at their historical cost. So, when we look at the acquisition of an asset, we have the invoice cost plus any costs that are incurred to put the asset in service, such as freight, electricity, consulting, all of those things. In this particular case, the asset cost $50,000. We had additional freight of $10,000 and installation costs of $5,000. So the total cost that this asset will be booked at is $65,000. And that will be then written off over its useful life. There are three types of depreciation methods: straight line, double declining balance, and units of production. And I'll look at each of these and show you calculations for them. But first, let's talk about salvage value. Salvage value is what the firm believes they can sell the asset for at the end of its useful life. And we take salvage value into consideration when calculating depreciation. And so salvage value is based on their historical experience of what an asset is worth when they're through using it in their particular operation. It might even be zero. So first, let's calculate straight line depreciation. Straight line depreciation is called straight line because we have the same amount of depreciation each year of the asset's life. First, we have to calculate the depreciation base. So we take the acquisition cost less the estimated salvage value to get the depreciation base. Then we divide the depreciation base by the number of years to get the annual depreciation. Now, this may be handled on a monthly basis. For example, we might say that an asset has a 60-month life. So you take the asset base and divide by 60 months to get the monthly amount of depreciation that's going to be recorded. So in this case, we have salvage value of $10,000. Subtract that from the acquisition cost, so our depreciation basis is $90,000. We're going to use a 10% depreciation rate. So we take 10% of $90,000, and each year's depreciation will be $9,000. And at the end of year 10, there will still be a residual on the books of $10,000 that has not been depreciated, which represents the salvage value. Now, in calculating double declining balance, we ignore salvage value. Double declining balance is calculated as follows. We take 2 times the straight line depreciation rate times the beginning balance at the beginning of the year, the book value. Now, book value is acquisition cost less accumulated depreciation that has been taken in prior periods. So in the first year, our beginning balance was $100,000. The depreciation rate, as you recall, was 10%. So 2 times 10% is 20%. We then multiply that times 100,000, and the first year's depreciation is $20,000, which is more than twice what the depreciation was under the straight line method. At the beginning of the next year, the beginning balance for depreciation was 80,000. The 100,000 less the 20,000 we took in year 1. So then we take 20% times 80,000, or 16,000, as the depreciation in year 2. And we continue to do this each year until we reach a point at which we reach the salvage value, because we cannot depreciate under the declining balance past the salvage value, even though we don't recognize the salvage value in making the original computation. The theory behind double declining balance is that it allows companies to even out the total cost of equipment over its life. The higher depreciation in the beginning years offsets the higher repairs and maintenance in years later on. So graphically, it has this appearance. Depreciation is the declining line, maintenance is the increasing line. So in year 1, we have a lot of depreciation and no maintenance. In year 5 or 6 or 7, we have less depreciation and a lot more maintenance. And at a point at about year 5, the two intersect.